person in the world after Lynn, me, and whoever. Yeah.
I think number two's, yep. So I've put it on record. So I don't know. I haven't got a separate machine checking.
It seems to be there. Just hold on.
Cool.
Yeah, it's definitely working.
Cool. Okay. I'm going to leave it going because stopping it and starting it again might cause some drama.
Yeah, but we won't say anything too outrageous now.
No, because we've got
children,
kids watching. And we have to keep it safe for work because I'm in a workplace.
Yes, exactly. How is it there?
Oh, wonderful.
I saw Lynn posted a picture of that. I mean, last time I was in Sydney, there wasn't that gigantic. I think that building is in fact James Packer's casino. Is it that rather ridiculously Bangaroo, huge tall building at the end of Darling Harbour?
Yeah, I'm just going to go to low data mode for all. That means that I can't see you, but you can see me. And it will mean that we've got a bit more bandwidth if we've got someone with a weak connection.
Yeah, I'll just turn off my other applications. But I love seeing you, Bernard. I hate not seeing you when we're talking.
But you can see me
because it's how we,
right?
It's how we can. No, I can't see you
now. That's killed the video, guys.
Yeah. Bernard, can you come back on video, please? Because otherwise, I can't see your eyes when we're suggesting that we,
it's turn
Robert off or on.
It's all about the eyebrows, you see.
Yeah.
In New Zealand, we communicate a lot with our eyebrows.
You're also, from a screen point of view, can you raise your screen slightly? I know it's only 4 minutes to go, but there we go. Yeah.
How's that?
Perfect.
Good.
Yep.
Okay. Excellent.
All right, Simon?
Yeah.
Yes. Yep. Good. Okay. I've already sent out the note and the invite. So we're expecting Catherine to join us in about 5 minutes after our chat. Yeah. No, good. And
do we need to do Kiri Allan? Or is she disposable in the sense that as an item, not as a person?
We can't ignore Kiri at the end with Josie because.
Okay. Have you got a skateboarding dog, Bernard? I just realised I don't have one.
No, actually.
Yeah, I think I probably do.
They used to. In fact, I set up on Reuters.com that section.
The odds. Yeah. Totally.
I don't know is it still there? I don't know.
Yeah. Odds are still there. Yeah. 1 second.
Cool. I don't know if it's still there.
We can talk about X too if you want. No, we can't. It's too. That would make us into Scott.
The
Galloway and.
I'm beginning to think he's got some sort of. We certainly just wiped out a whole bunch of intangible value. Yeah.
Oh, Jesus.
He's been working hard on it.
Yeah.
Lifestyle. I'm looking. There doesn't seem to be an odd section anymore. Cool. Still a minute and a half to go that I can see.
I will have a
skateboarding dog.
Yeah. I bloody found one today and I can't quite remember what it was now.
My shortcut for that used to be going to Reuters odd section.
Oh, I understand.
But surely there's a donkey who's being repatriated to Britain or something.
Yep.
Was there a donkey
Simon's
evacuated?
messaging you, Bernard. Yeah.
Okay. Not the Hoon. Okay. 30 seconds to go. Yep. Cool. Good afternoon. Yep. All good. Cool. All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Tēnā koutou katoa, everyone on the kaka. This is the Hoon. I am Bernard Hickey. We're here with our co-host, Peter Bale. Peter.
Bernard, how are you? Are you allowed to say tēnā koutou katoa in Sydney, where you are now? Because you're the voice of Maori Sydney, as opposed to the you've got this extraordinary referendum coming up in Australia.
Yeah,
we like to think of this whole First Nation thing in New Zealand as being somewhat different, and it most certainly is. How is it looking there? I mean, you've been there for about 20 minutes, i.e., a week. Give us your consolidated view of where the referendum is going.
Yeah, it started off like it was going to be approved, but of course the opposition, the Liberal National Coalition, the Conservatives have jumped in and made it a big deal, and the Murdoch papers are going gangbusters to stop it. And it looks like it might not get over the line now. It's quite a thing. There's been a change in Australia, right? Since I lived here in the early 2000s, when there wasn't much notice given to Indigenous issues.
Anything Indigenous, yeah.
No. But what you see now is every public event, the host will acknowledge the elders of the land. And in fact, a couple of events I participated in this week, that was exactly what happened. And one of the interesting twists on that introduction lately is the comment that I acknowledge that the owners of the land have not given up sovereignty to it.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Funny enough, I went to something last night which recognised the tangata whenua of Auckland as well, and was very embracing. And I think God forbid that there should be examples that Australia might follow, but this referendum thing is a very good indication of. I guess that's where our friend David Seymour, the Lotus driving dwarf, has picked this up from. And I noticed John Howard, who just had his 84th birthday, probably enraptured with Rupert Murdoch, so said this referendum shall not pass, and most Australians disagree with it. It's a very interesting problem, Bernard, in Australia, where you've got, to put something like this up to a referendum, and should we be clear about what the referendum is, which is essentially that there should be a kind of council, is it? A sort of executive council of Aboriginal representatives to feed in to the main parliament, because Aboriginal people have such a tiny percentage of the population, because of various things that we won't go into just yet, that there has to be some explicit means for them to have a say. Yeah,
and it's an attempt to get some sort of constitutional involvement for the tangata whenua of Australia, and it's an attempt. It's nowhere near as comprehensive or as embedded as the Treaty of Waitangi, but it's something. And unfortunately, the process of having this debate brings all of this bile to the surface, which you're always going to get. But it is, it's something, and you see it in sport. There's a lot of acknowledgement of local culture. There's a lot of embracing of Aboriginal athletes, and not always brilliant.
Well, I was going to say there's a couple of Aboriginal athletes who've had some pretty difficult times. But Bernard, I was thinking, when you mentioned that you were working in Sydney in the early 2000s, and I have to admit that I was there a little earlier than you in almost the same job, and at that time there was talk of a compact. It right back in the time of Bob Hawke and Paul Keating, there was the talk of a compact, that there needed to be a resolution, because it's such an interesting set of problems, and I think you and I are not necessarily the most qualified people to talk at it, being Pākehā New Zealanders, but the Treaty of Waitangi is at least a baseline where there was a conversation to be had and a kind of recognition of who was there before. Whereas Australia is much more, more difficult, because that the recognition of the First Nation people, of the Indigenous people, was never made by the colonialists.
No, there's a lot more pathway to go. But it's been a fun trip, which I won't be doing too many times. But
I bet you will. In the new Kaka Learjet. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think my carbon footprint needs to be restricted. In particular, because we've got some climate issues. Peter, I wanted to bring in Catherine Dyer now, who's been doing some great work for us this week on some big climate news. Catherine, great to see you again.
You too. Hi, Peter. Hi, Bernard.
Hi, Catherine. How are you? No, I think Zoom and headphones, and you being in Sydney, me being in Perugia or wherever I am, is an excellent way to have a low carbon way to do the kaka.
Exactly. No, we should all do this. And Catherine, I wanted to talk through some of the big news that's happened in climate in the last week or so, because it really has been epic. Anyone who's seen those charts showing the not just the rainfall in Auckland, but the heat in the Atlantic, the ice loss in the Antarctic, the extraordinary heat we've seen across southern Europe and also parts of the United States and China, to the point where in Sicily this week, one particular town was cut off from its power and its water because its roads melted, which took out the power and water lines in the road that were embedded under the roads. And clearly something is going on. What are we hearing from the scientists about this? These sorts of numbers, which, for example, include in the Antarctic the loss of sea ice being 6 standard deviations away from the median. What are you hearing?
Yeah, it's just incredible reports coming in, isn't it? There was a guy, a climate scientist in Austria, who's been sort of doing the numbers and trying to estimate what July is going to look like. Obviously, it hasn't finished yet, but he thinks it's going to come out something like between 1.3 and 1.7 degrees Celsius higher as an average for July versus kind of pre-industrial temperatures. So that's definitely starting
What's
to
the
get
highest?
up there.
Did I see it's the highest in 120,000 years?
Yeah. I mean, that's, we're setting new records at the moment. And they're also saying, because we're at the start of an El Nino period, that we're likely to see more records tumbling over the next few months. Yeah, it's hard to talk about how hot it is there when it's so cold here.
Yeah, Catherine, I was really struck. I'm a big, not fan exactly, but I have been waiting for this organisation in the UK to emerge, which has now emerged, the Weather Attribution Initiative which is at Imperial College. And they have said that this, the current heat wave, I mean, the point of them is to do that thing where you say, yes, this is related to anthropomorphic or anthropogenic climate change, i.e. human climate change factors. And they've said that this was, essentially that this current heat wave and the various things that have gone on since May are essentially impossible without anthropogenic. But also what's clever about them, and to me it goes quite well to the climate skeptics. They said that the floods in northern Italy earlier on were not related to anthropogenic climate change. So it's a very interesting set of. I just feel we now have both the long-term data and also these people trying to give us short-term data. There's not much to doubt now.
No, I don't see how anybody can still doubt it at this point. But, that attribution science is kind of this whole new emerging area. And it does get pretty technical, I think. But, it's really interesting what they can show now that is related to, with whether or not it's anthropogenic. So, yeah, hard to argue.
And we've got the ocean. I mean, I was really, I think, I'm not sure it got enough attention in New Zealand, but and maybe we've talked about this before. In fact, I'm pretty sure we have, Bernard. But the sea temperatures around New Zealand rose 2 to 3 degrees over the last 3 or 4 years. Yes, there was actually that was La Nina, of course. It meant that you can't farm salmon in the Marlborough Sounds anymore. And then you look at Miami and Florida at the moment, and the sea is literally 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and you're talking about some of the most important it's just the idea is just so extraordinary. And of course, there's been peaks and troughs, but all the peaks are in the last 45 years.
And
There was
also
a really... Sorry, go ahead, Bernard.
and we've seen I think 28 days in a row of brand new records every day. Catherine, I just wanted to jump into this area of the day after tomorrow. You wrote a great piece this week, which went out to everyone immediately, about the AMOC. Could you explain to us what the AMOC is and why there's been a paper that's come out in Nature that has got everyone talking again about it?
Yeah, so the AMOC is the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, is what the acronym stands for, and it's this whole massive system of ocean currents. So what happens is you get very cold, dense, salty water up in the northern Atlantic, which sinks because it's heavy with salt in it, and that tends to spread southwards, and then that sort of meets up with a whole lot of very heated weather from the water from the tropical zones, which rise up and then move up towards the northern area, and they sort of join with the Gulf Stream for a bit of time before veering off towards the Atlantic again. So it's just it's the system that overturns warm and cold water and shifts it on the south-north longitudinal part of the
axis.
Yeah.
The longitudinal axis,
Yeah.
I think is the word you're looking for.
Yep.
Got it.
And
Yeah.
and that's what we've seen is this paper that says the long feared or speculated idea of a collapse of the AMOC, which is referred to in sensational terms in that movie, The Day After Tomorrow, which has these, computer generated instant freezing of New York, which of course is just off the charts, not going to happen. But that sense of disruption of these
phenomena that have kept us warm and dry or wet or moist, there's a reason why the UK at its latitude, not to mention longitude, but its latitude is relatively warm and benign and seldom has rain. Seldom has snow. There's a reason why Madrid, which I believe is more or less at the same latitude as New York, has a different temperature. Of course, it's a much more continental place. But we're talking about very fundamental shifts. And it's 2055, I think it was, 2055 to 2075 was this idea of the collapse of the AMOC. Is that right? It's brought it forward by about 100 years.
Yeah, well, actually, this paper, the most recent paper that's come out, is suggesting that there's a 95% probability of it collapsing sometime between 2025 and 2095. With it being most likely in the sort of mid-century timing. But there is, of course, a bit of dispute about this in the scientific community, a lot of talking about it, because it's based on looking at a particular data set and a particular kind of modelling, and there are other things that other scientists know about ocean circulation that might have changed that outcome if they were included. So there's some dispute about just
and you
how,
you will have seen the person that I saw who's a kind of a noted climate scientist saying the Gulf Stream is not going to collapse in any way because it's related to a different phenomenon of the rotation of the Earth and so on. But I think the point is, isn't it, that we are seeing phenomenal potential disruption of quite fundamental forces that we've relied on to farm and to live and to
Yeah, and I think Catherine's done a great job of pulling together the competing scientific views on this paper. And presenting it in a way which shows that the IPCC, which has been quite conservative, is saying has previously said there's a 10% chance of some sort of collapse of the AMOC, whereas this paper and the latest research suggests that that percentage likelihood is higher rather than it's absolutely going to happen, which I thought was a really good way of expressing it, and it's been a very popular piece so far.
Yeah, that outcome is also something that we're getting used to, where some of the predictions or forecasts of the IPCC, we seem to have a lot more downside risk. So it's more likely that things are worse than what they're saying, than that they're going to be better than what they say. And so those sort of things piling up is a bit worrying as well.
Catherine, what did you make of, I was kind of interested in Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General's comments today, we're reaching boiling point. I sort of realized today how much I don't really like Antonio Guterres, and I think he's been absolutely useless and probably the worst Secretary General of the UN in my lifetime, because I just think he's a raver and a ranter and does fuck all, basically, other than possibly the grain deal with Russia. But do you think, I'm not Antonio Guterres, but I've been accused even by the readers of my spin-off column of being too bleak about climate change in the last couple of weeks. What do you think is the value or the impact of Antonio Guterres' comments today that we're reaching boiling point and it's all desperate in a crisis?
Well, I think a lot of people would agree with him. I'm not really, there's a risk of sounding too bleak and making people feel too much like there's nothing that can be done. And I think at this point that, we've had choices all the way along that could take us along different paths. And even at this point, there are still a lot of choices we can make that can take us along different paths. So I think even, if, the information that we're getting at the moment is quite alarming and is quite bleak. But at the same time, we still have choices that can give us different outcomes. So
it's so interesting that you say that, because I think, and not to become your editor, since I have nothing to do with the kaka other than this weekly thing, but it's interesting to think about the choices that individuals can make, which are incredibly limited. And, I got told off by somebody at the spin-off the other day for having repeated the Grantham Institute's 9 things to do. But 2 of them were about political activism and getting angry about some of these things. And I suspect that, as banal as they seem, that political awareness and political action and saying we need action is actually the way to go. Because you've probably seen in the UK this week, Rishi Sunak is talking about turning down the commitment on some of the net zero obligations because it's politically unacceptable or politically difficult.
But
that's right. I think there is a social tipping point we can get to, and the sooner we get towards that social tipping point, that leads people to be more interested in more climate action, the better it will be.
And things do change. For example, this week, James Shaw reversed effectively, the government reversed its stance from before Christmas to tighten up the ETS, and we saw an immediate jump in the carbon price. So the government, was focused on bread and butter issues in December and January, and got challenged in court by Lawyers for Climate Action. They did a great job of presenting the case that the government's decision to ignore the Climate Commission was in breach of the law. And the government said, we'll have another look at it. So those changes happened, the price changed, and suddenly, remember, for every $10 increase in the carbon price, we see an increase in the costs of transport of around about $1.50, $1.60 for an average household, and just under $1 for a lower income household. So things can be done, and things are changing. I'm quite keen over the next few months before the election to start looking at some of the solutions, if you like, some of the actions that governments could take with different and doing it in a way which talks about much faster action that is somewhere close to politically acceptable. So that's a challenge for us to try to do that, because I think if
especially
you can
in your
start,
solutions journalism approach, Bernard, of which Catherine is a living example.
exactly, we're doing some stuff to get information out there and look at some of the policy choices that maybe sometimes don't bubble to the surface in other ways. So, Catherine, thank you very much. Lovely to have you, and great
Thanks,
to
Catherine.
see you.
Really good to see you.
Your first
You too.
story out
Talk
there,
soon.
and it went out to everyone immediately. That's something we're proud of. Robert,
exciting.
Hey.
Robert, it's great to see
Robert,
you.
you handsome devil, you've been talking to the bloody Otago Daily Times, I see. Jesus.
Well, yes,
we
they
thought
are
we
the
had you
local paper.
exclusively.
No, we're
How are you
open
guys?
access. Oh, very good.
Do they send you bottles of gin from time to time? I bet they
No,
don't.
they're not as generous as you.
Yeah,
Peter
well, we
and
got. I think you
Bernard.
probably. I think
No.
with any luck, you finished that one. So I must send you another one. I've
Oh
told
no,
Bernard to
it's-
send you
it's
one, but I'd be
still
surprised.
savouring it.
I'll bring one back through duty free. That's
Yeah,
good.
good.
Robert, it's been a heck of a week for visits from
Yeah.
very interesting and influential and connected people to this country. The two partners that came, the Secretary of State, that's pretty high profile for New Zealand, but also Anthony Albanese.
He was coming to see Megan Rapinoe, not Nanaia Mahuta. But yeah, although I totally
true,
endorse
yeah.
him seeing Nanaia Mahuta as well.
Yeah. What did you think of those two visits and the outcomes from those visits, at least?
Pretty successful, I think, so far. And there'll be some people in New Zealand disappointed, because I think Nanaia Mahuta again emphasised caution in relation to Pillar 2 of AUKUS, this enhanced security arrangement. I think the Albanese visit seems to have gone well. It seems that he's been visiting a lot of people in Wellington, but it was interesting because the New Zealand government said that the relationship between Australia and New Zealand was at an all-time high, and the Australians haven't done anything to dispel that. And as we've discussed before, the strong impression I got, and it's clearly a very good relationship between Nanaia Mahuta and Antony Blinken, I was struck by the fact that in the press conference that they held, that he referred to at one point by her first name, which was, and also all the body language and the way they presented themselves seems to me that they get on very well. And Antony Blinken said in his address, in his remarks to the media, that he had been really astonished and favourably pleased by his first visit to New Zealand. So I think he went out of his way to, be extremely positive about the visit. He said the door was very open, as he put it, for New Zealand to walk through if he wants to go to Pillar 2. But I got the feeling that for the Americans, it's not a game changer. And, there's been a lot of focus on AUKUS, but one thing I've picked up, there are other issues which strongly bind the United States and New Zealand at the moment, which are not getting too much air. One is the fact that New Zealand is emerging in America's eyes as an important space actor.
Oh, yeah.
And the second thing,
right.
That's an interesting idea, Robert. Where did you pick that one up from?
well,
really
last year
fascinating.
we hosted at the well-known University of Otago Foreign Policy School.
Which you were supposed to
Dr.
invite
Maria
us to,
Pozza,
you
who's
bugger.
one of the
No,
leading
no.
experts
We're coming next year.
on international law in space. Maria hosted an excellent 2-day conference on this whole question of New Zealand's emergencies and space actor, and it's happening rapidly. With rocket.
it's not-
Robert, what did you? There was a bit of a. I mean, it's one of those things that happens in Wellington, happens with journalists. There was an attempt with Albanese being here, and of course, I've been doing that thing about how do you pronounce Albanese, but I found a very good video of him saying it's Albanese, as in spaghetti bolognese. But he said, "I'm just quite happy with Albo, thank you."
Yeah.
But there was an attempt to kind of draw a line between what the Australians said and what Blinken said about us entering the Tier 2. That essentially the Australians indicated there was no prospect of us entering Tier 2. We didn't need you. And Blinken just saying, actually, it's academic. But is there a division there Is there
I'm not
a
sure,
gap?
to be quite frankly, between the Australians and the Americans. I think what I do know is that quite clearly two things. Firstly, that the Americans said publicly they regard New Zealand as a trusted partner in matters of international security. And so I think from the American point of view, the connection with New Zealand has real value whether we are in AUKUS or not. And I think that Nanaia Mahuta was non-committal, but she did point out something that was quite significant. And she pointed out that the countries of the region, she mentioned explicitly the Pacific Island states and the Treaty of Rarotonga, which is, she was saying, quite frankly, that the countries of the Pacific Island states region have committed themselves to non-nuclear security. New Zealand is committed to that, and therefore New Zealand will not compromise. She could have mentioned also that the countries of ASEAN are committed to non-nuclear security. So there's a lot of actors there that New Zealand does not want to disappoint by seeming to be taking a backward step on non-nuclear security.
Yeah,
So
it
I
was
think
interesting
the message
Sorry, Robert.
was actually this is our global brand. We need to be very careful here. We have yet to be convinced that the advantages or the payoffs from being part of Pillar 2 will outweigh the possible blurring of New Zealand's well-known, and remember, New Zealand was a major driving force for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which more than 50 countries. So there's a lot at stake for New Zealand, and I get the distinct feeling that we're being diplomatic, but that New Zealand's not going to, this side of an election, be pushing Pillar 2 or seeking...
Yeah, interesting. I was really struck, or not really struck, but we had a couple of interesting developments in the Pacific this week, including President Macron turning up in the New Caledonia. Our friend Patrick Smelly, of course, flew up there on holiday, but of course, I'm sure he knew that
On
Macron
his
was
Learjet.
coming.
Yep.
And his Learjet, exactly. But, so Macron, talked about imperialist forces in the Pacific, which is kind of ironic when you're sitting in a French, in literally a French colony, accusing others of being imperialist. But then you also had the visit to Beijing and then returning of the Sogovari, the Solomon's prime minister. There's quite a lot of dynamism in there at the moment. You've got the French in there essentially saying, we're going to be we're going to talk about imperialism, but we actually just mean that to be, we have to have a voice here as well as the United States and China. And then you've got Sogovari having quite a sort of splittist, dare I say, approach to the rest of the Pacific.
Yeah, but I think the one thing that I found very encouraging, and let's put AUKUS to one side, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States seem to be on the same page. Antony Blinken referred to this as converging perceptions of China. When I say they're on the same page, I think New Zealand has pushed for a long time, and Anthony Albanese agrees with Jacinda Ardern and now Chris Hipkins on this, that you mustn't approach the Pacific Island states purely in terms of great power rivalry and try to recruit them to one side or the other. They're saying, what is the national security problem for the Pacific Island states? It's climate change. Yeah. That is the number one threat that all countries face in that region. Two of them, the threat could be terminal if something is not done in the next 2 decades. So I think the pitch is now that the three Western countries, or Western-orientated countries, basically try to address the security problems that the Pacific Island states articulate. If they do that, then you won't eliminate China from the region, but China as a political threat, right? China as a political threat would be diminished. In other words, China's too big to contain. They're going to be in the Pacific. How do you deal with that? You don't sort of go into the politics of pretense and say, "Oh, we're going to contain them and prevent them from being influential."
Yeah, Robert, I had a little. There's a chap who is it what's his name? What's his handle? Bernard Thomas Cranmer. Yep. Cranmer, who accosted me today on Twitter about Nanaia Mahuta, because I still think, as we've talked a couple of a couple of times on this, that she and Jacinda Ardern before her, but I mean, obviously her as Prime Minister, Jacinda as Prime Minister, but have been very subtle and clever in the way they've managed this delicate balance with China.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
the reaction to the meetings in the last couple of weeks from serious people has been really positive. And I think too, from a global contest point of view, this has been a bad week for China. You've got to remember the biggest event in global geopolitics this week, you could argue, is the replacement, which was a bit of a shock, of the missing in action foreign minister.
Yeah.
And not just with anyone, but the guy who was there before. It's like bringing
Yeah.
back
So
the old
we've
guy.
got consistency. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we don't know the reasons yet. I know we've explored this once, but one thing that has occurred to
We
me,
can
thinking about
always
this-
explore things about that involve shagging
No, we
television interviewers
No.
and having
Well, we won't
babies
go
with them.
down
We
that
can
route,
explore
but,
them
no,
quite happily. Thank you.
Let's just. It occurred to me that this is a major political setback for Xi Jinping, because Wang Yi, who's emerged once again as foreign minister, is widely respected actually in the United States. The United States, in its own coded way, has been very supportive of his appointment, saying that he was a skilled diplomat and someone they knew. But I think it's a defeat for. I think there are signs here. There's a political power struggle going on. I believe, can't prove it because it's a closed political system. But there are signs that Xi has got some pretty powerful enemies in the Central Committee of the ruling Communist Party, and his protege, Qin Gang, has disappeared from view for a month, and now has been replaced by someone, Wang Yi, who is a career diplomat who speaks Japanese. I think he's been brought in partly to maybe cut Xi down to size a bit,
Gosh,
but
that's an
also
interesting idea.
to restore some capability in the foreign affairs area at a vital time for China, at a time when China's become more dependent on the West, not less.
Yeah,
And
because
in which there's been deep concerns within the Central Committee of the ruling Communist Party about Xi's almost, well, I wouldn't say unreserved because it has been measured, but quite clear political identification with Putin's security concerns in the Ukraine. And I think, there must have been voices behind closed doors saying, Putin's actually undermining our foreign policy. He's tearing up the principles of territorial integrity and sovereignty, which underpins our claim to Taiwan and Hong Kong. So you can imagine the sort of debates going on. I wouldn't be surprised, can't prove it, whether this reshuffling of the pack at the foreign ministry level is a bit of a political setback for the paramount leader in China.
Yeah, but can we get
particularly-
back to the shagging?
no. Let's stay away from the shagging and go straight to the heart of the matter, which
I'm
is
sorry, I'm
that
too naughty sometimes.
he'd only been there for 7 months, and this was the guy that Xi parachuted in. So this is a bad look for Xi, and it also reflects some of the pressure that's on in China. Remember this, argy-bargy between China and the United States?
Jesus,
Has-
argy-bargy, Bernard. You can
Yeah,
take
yeah.
the boy out of Mata, but you can't, argy-bargy.
Argy-bargy between China and the United States has been sort of at a very elevated level and doesn't seem to have affected trade much at all until now. Because when you look at the export and import figures, things are really drying up for China. They're finding it more difficult to both get the imports they need, the chips they need to build the manufacturing they need. There is significant action now from both American and European companies to onshore a lot of their manufacturing activities, to friendshore, to move things away from China, even if it's not back onshore. And this is starting to have an impact on their economy. The export engine is slowing down, and they've got plenty of challenges inside their domestic construction sector. They can't just push the button to build another gazillion apartments anymore. And consumers now can see that there is tension between the superpowers. It's not a good look to be,
Oh, I don't know, Bernard. I think you're talking bollocks on that one. I'm
No,
sorry.
no. When
I
you
was
look
really
at-
struck this week by the chief executive of Stellantis, which is what we used to call Fiat and which owns Fiat, Peugeot, Citroen, and Renault. No, it doesn't own Renault. Whichever one, the other one,
Chrysler.
Jeep, and Chrysler, said that they want to be all electric by 2030. I think it was. No more petrol cars, but Chinese cars are invading Europe, and they're 20% cheaper. I mean, I don't want to come over all Kissingerist on this, but we've got to remember there's 1.4 billion people there, sophisticated economy now. We need to get real and actually get on with these people.
Well, that may be
not to become an Otago University professor of international relations. Do go ahead, Robert, please.
No, I was just going to say, but I think Bernard's really got a point. Yes, you're quite right, Peter. I'm sure Western companies are nervous about Chinese cars being unleashed on the car market. I'm sure they have, with some justification, I guess. But I think the other thing is, if you look at the internal situation in China, the whole legitimacy of the party rests on delivering good growth every year. And Xi is presiding over, if you like, a declining economy, which means those with political ambitions believe he's vulnerable. And I think this removal of the foreign minister is linked to the diminishing Chinese economic performance. And I think the one or two voices are saying to Xi, your wolf warrior diplomacy is costing us economically. We better rein this in. And I think he may have had to accept this demotion of his protege through gritted teeth, knowing that.
It's so interesting you say that, Robert. I was listening this week, and I do recommend it, although I don't recommend other podcasts usually on this podcast. But the Economist's Drum Tower podcast with their Chinese correspondents is excellent, and they were one number that I was really struck by was that the population of the number of Chinese Communist Party members in China is the same as the population of Germany, which is about 80 million. But you're talking about in a country of 1.4 million.
Yes.
So that question of legitimacy is always on a kind of knife edge. It's so interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
And from the point of view of consumers, what's actually happening in China at the moment is a consumer spending strike. So consumers are they've got plenty of money in the bank, they're just not spending it. And the domestic economy, which has always been the hope that China would switch from being an exporting and construction economy to a consumer economy, that switch is not happening. And to make it happen, you need consumers to be confident enough about their futures to spend money, and they're not. And in a normal democracy, you look at consumer confidence, you get a sense of how people are feeling about the world. Now, in China, it's not a normal democracy, but you still have consumer confidence, and that tells you that the people of China are not thrilled with what's going on at the moment. Hey, Robert, thank you very much for being on the show. It's lovely to see you. And
thank you.
Robert, I'm really appalled that you're talking to any other media outlet, though, because this is the way you to get your voice out.
We're open.
And no one ever interrupts you here either.
That's part of the fun, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Lovely to see you.
You're very welcome. Hi, Josie.
And we're very lucky to have Josie Pagani back with us.
We are very lucky to have Josie.
We've
We've seen her for ages.
Yeah, and it's wonderful to see you after a great column today, by the way, in the Post, looking at some of the problems politically for the government and making a very various ways to make a difference, and one of them is to fund proper dental care in this country, because now whether you've got teeth at all is in a way
As you know, Bernard.
Yeah. No, I'm is a sign of class, frankly.
It is. Yeah, I mean, it's one of the most obvious ones in New Zealand, actually, because there are few democracies like ours in the OECD that do not have some kind of publicly funded dental care. I mean, I grew up in the UK, I was born here, grew up in the UK, and had free dental care, free eye examinations, free GP visits, so when I came back to New Zealand in my 20s, it was like, what the hell, like this, you're paying to go to the doctor, you're paying to, and then, you go and get your teeth checked after the age of 18. I mean, even for people on a relatively good income, $6,000 average for a crown, or $400 for a filling. I mean, it's extraordinary. So yeah, it's become a signifier of poverty. And I remember working for Jim Anderton on this years ago.
Who?
With John.
Who?
Jim.
Who did you just mention then?
Jim Anderton. He's
You are
one of the-
not old enough to work for Jim Anderson. That was ridiculous.
Yeah, absolutely.
You must
in
have been a
government.
child.
We were in one of the things that we came into government with was the policy for free and subsidised health, dental care, paid parental leave, Kiwi Bank.
So Josie, I didn't realise he was going to bring up toothy pigs, and
Toothy pigs.
rabbit stamps and hippopotamus stamps on the back of it. So,
it's a good column.
and I
Everyone
may
should read
actually
it.
tell you a really outrageous story which people will love, and it might get me into trouble with Kim Hill or something. But Josie, what happened to school dental nurses then?
The murder house. Labor, the Helen Clark government, I think it was when Nick King was Minister of Health, funded basically dental checkups for school kids. So up to the age of 18, so 17, everything's free. So you either do it at the school, like you did in the old days, or you go to the local dentist and it's free. Then it stops, right? So
Yeah.
I've got friends same age as me, middle-aged, who've got a full mouth of dentures, and that is an absolute black and white sign of income. Because if you can't afford to go to the dentist, your only option after that age, Peter, when you leave school, your only option is to turn up at the emergency room at the hospital.
Yeah, exactly. No, but so this is, I just don't understand. So, all right, I don't fully, I know that was a socialist time and it was all, Michael Joseph Savage and Christ knows what, but I wasn't that old. There was an idea that if we got, it's why we did fluoridation, that if we got people a reasonable foundation, like your thing about the UK, I think is a little bit out of date now because the NHS dentist thing has completely collapsed and is a disaster. But that thing about preventive medicine and getting kids toothy pigs sorted out until they're teenagers is a brilliant idea.
Absolutely, but also having a health. So the prevention, we don't do enough in prevention generally across health, right? And actually, one of the great things about new technology coming out is that we're going to get much better at the preventative end of health than the treatment end. But having said that, you're still going to end up with, when you in a society like New Zealand, where there is roughly 50% of the population can't afford to go to the dentist, they're going to end up needing treatment, and they're going to need it in a hospital. If you've got to look at the long-term expense of that for a start, but also you can't have a health system that is responding to bad health outcomes by saying, well, I'm going to judge your lifestyle. So imagine if we said, and I wrote about this in the column, imagine if we said, you ate way too much pasta and, chocolates and chippies, and now you've got a heart attack in your 50s, look after yourself.
Don't we do that? Isn't this whole discussion about obesity exactly that as well?
Well, absolutely, but that's the preventative end. But once somebody ends up in hospital, we don't sit there going, folding our arms and going, you fat git, you should never have eaten pasta or chocolate or chippies. We treat the heart attack. So I think, if you're going to say that we shouldn't be treating people, or we shouldn't be funding people to have better teeth because they should just not eat sweets and sugary drinks. Absolutely. But it's a terrible approach to a health system to say, we'll only fund you if you've lived a decent life, and we'll judge your lifestyle. So I just think
the context of this, of course, is that the government this week appears to be getting ready to propose taking GST off food, possibly fresh food. And the question is, how does the government spend its money to try to get re-elected? And there's a good question about, if you could spend quite a bit of money taking GST off food, which you could use in other ways. For example, reforming working for families. Or, as you say, paying for dental care for everyone, we're at that point in the political cycle now. looking to spend some money, and what we're trying to do is say, hey, there's various choices, and here's maybe the best way you can get the most benefit for that for the people who need it the most, which I think is good. Josie, what did you think of this dramas around not just GST on food, which came out in a weird way? Some people are saying it was leaked by Labor to National so that National could bring it up and maybe Labor could see how it goes before they say.
That's conspiracy theory.
Yeah. Or I suspect cock up usually rather than conspiracy.
Yes.
And then of course we had Te Pāti Māori with a full on, across the board, no quarter asked bunch of wealth taxes, which was sort of fun to watch actually. So what did you think of the whole tax politics this week?
Oh golly, so there's several things there. One is, I think Labor knows, and this was kind of the background to my column today, that I think Labor realizes they need a big idea, right? So they're thinking, well, let's go back on the diary items from the last sort of few elections. Oh, GST off fruit and veg. Now, I mean, I happen to think, I know there are lots of reasons to look at why that might not be the best policy, but I reckon it's a policy worth looking at. Other countries have done it. They've managed to define the difference between a tin of pears and a pear, which was pretty obvious.
But they haven't managed to define the difference between a Jaffa cake and a cake in England.
Well, but you don't. I mean, you're doing fruit and veg. A Jaffa cake and a cake is relevant. I mean, so
we don't have Jaffas anymore anyway in New Zealand. Carry on.
I mean, there are issues around how much of the GST saving gets passed on to consumers and all of these issues. But having said all of that, I think, Bernard, the biggest problem with it is, I mean, you and I have talked about wealth taxes and capital gains taxes, and we're an advocate for reforming our incredibly broken tax system, which, I mean, here's some figures, if I can remember them rightly, but basically our tax revenue, about 45% of it comes from taxes on wages, and I think it's only and 31% from GST, and then it's only about 16% comes from corporate profits, and then about 1% from excise on booze and cigarettes and fags and whatever. So we're hugely.
Do we charge more excise on those things than not just GST?
Oh yeah.
I thought we were living in a flat tax paradise.
No.
You need a mortgage to buy a packet of cigarettes these days.
I know. This is why.
I do understand that.
This is why that.
But Josie, may I just ask you about this, because it's something Bernard and I talk about, and I think I wish you'd been on a couple of weeks ago, because I think you need to be on every week, especially in the run up to the election. But Bernard wrote a really brilliant piece about what I considered to be, as a non-political person but as an observer, the cop-out by Chris Hipkins on what seemed a very reasonable and intelligent set of GST things. Not GST things, capital gains tax things, which I can't imagine politically would not have brought him huge amounts of potential votes from people under 40. But
that's right. And there was a poll out just before that he ruled it out, where basically the majority of New Zealanders are going some kind of wealth tax. I mean, people don't really understand what it is, but they're kind of going, what they're getting is not an envy thing. They're kind of going, I think I'm paying too much, and I think there needs to be the levers need to be pulled so that others are paying their fair share. It's not a kind of envy the rich thing. But I think what I was going to say about the GST thing, although I'm kind of lukewarm about it, but I do support it as a concept and worth looking at. But the problem they've got, I think, is that they're not doing a tax switch. So that's what John Key did when he lowered income, increased GST. So there was a tax switch, so people could see, okay, what you're doing is you're actually redistributing towards working people away from consumption. Towards consumption away from working people. So the problem here is that there's no tax switch. So how are they going to pay for a cut in GST?
And of course, we don't know it's yet the policy. But
we don't.
Josie,
that's the problem with any policy being announced between now and the election. You've got to say how you're going to pay it. And the wealth tax was a tax switch, free tax threshold up to 10,000, I think it was, and then a relatively minor tax on anything above $5 million. So you can see how you pay for it.
Yeah,
And you
it did.
can
It
see-
did look very simple. But Josie, just on the GST thing, am I just naive and having not lived in New Zealand? Weren't we gifted something really amazing by Roger Douglas with the absolutism of the way GST was introduced all those years ago? You know, that it was
Well-
nothing to argue about. It was across everything.
And
it's
I'll
been
let my
it's
friend Bernard answer that. Bernard,
Well, you're absolutely right, Peter, that it was a clean, pure system. And not just for GST, but also for income tax. You know, we got rid of all sorts of exemptions for that. And it would have been absolutely brilliant if we'd also had a broad-based low-rate tax on capital gains
Correct.
or
Yeah.
wealth. And this is the sort of frustration, and this is where I get at the purists, right? The purists, I get it, you know. My background is in economics. I'm all about, you know, nice clean rules and no exceptions and all of that, which is fine. But they didn't take the last step. It's like they introduced a suite of perfect policies, except the one policy they should have introduced, which would have made it completely
which
perfect.
actually Grant Robertson was trying to address in that thing you did the other day.
Exactly.
And that's where
Exactly.
it's so interesting that other chap resigned.
so
You know, that
David
seems
Parker,
to be
yeah.
a much more significant resignation.
That other chap.
Josie, what do you think about that resignation?
Yeah, I mean, your background's economics, Bernard. My background, I did a degree in political theatre, so I'm not on this, but have made
What
up
would be the Brechtian answer to this? Yeah.
It will be dialectic. That's all I can tell you. But what I would say is that Adam Smith, the great architect of the kind of pure classic liberalist tax system, way back in 1776, his first principle of how you have a good tax system is fairness. And I looked at that Labor Party policy, which was basically saying, yeah, we need to address the balance here, shift some of the tax burden over here and reduce it over here. It would have passed Adam Smith's fairness test. And his other principles are, it has to be efficient. So it has to be, like you said with GST, it has to be efficient, easy to
Sorry,
understand.
Josie, did you mean the proposed Grant Robertson thing when you said it looked fair?
Yeah.
Did you?
The Labour tax, yeah. Whereas the Te Pāti Māori wealth tax system, I mean, Bernard and I have been supporters of a tax on capital for many, many years and talked about it all the time. The Te Pāti Māori one is like I think it's a 48% tax on anyone earning over $300,000. It's like, even I'm not going to support that one. So there are limits.
Well, and even better, if you have a beach house or a batch or something which you're not living in for more than 6 months of the year.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, no, Te Pāti Māori would tax you 33% of the market value of the house every year.
Do you know what it reminds me of, guys? When I was in the UK and at university during the miners' strike, and we actually passed a resolution at the student union, Labour Party Student Union annual conference, to turn, I think it was Kenilworth Castle and Warwick Castle into a retirement home for striking miners. Slightly reminds me, the Te Pāti Māori policy slightly reminds me of that. It's kind of going.
So Josie, haven't we just missed? I mean, as Bernard is one of the few journalists to have pointed out, haven't we just missed? Hasn't Chris Hipkins just missed an historic opportunity to choose a really logical set of policies that actually, because Bernard wants to talk about the Kiri Allan thing and the various collapses of ministers and wheels coming off, which is slightly an ironic phrase to use with Kiri, but. That was a real opportunity, completely missed, wasn't it? To bring in a really intelligent CGT.
There's an idea that being in the centre is somehow bland and beige. 50 Shades of Beige. It's kind of, and it's not, right. I mean, look at Keir Starmer in the UK, who, as a person, he could run at a pigeon and it wouldn't move. He's quite bland. But he has managed.
He might don't forget he was the the head of public prosecutions. I think that chicken or pigeon might be in trouble. Yeah.
So he has come up with some really tough. He's taken his own party on, unlike Chris Hipkins, who hasn't yet been able to jettison the stupid projects that are costing $50 billion to combine. Lake Onslow, light rail in Auckland, the kind of things that you just go, get rid of that and have some big, exciting, transformational policy that some people will disagree with, but go out and be bold and courageous. Don't be a Ming vase politician where you behave as if you're carrying this priceless vase across a polished floor. And
Could you just do that again? Because the Ming, I've heard Alistair Campbell and
Alistair Campbell
talk about
and-
the Ming.
yeah.
Could you explain the Ming vase strategy?
So it's actually Roy Jenkins, UK, former Labor, then went into SDP. But Roy Jenkins first used it, and he used it to describe Tony Blair in '97. And he said that Tony Blair was being so careful not to lose the election that he was like he was carrying a priceless Ming vase across a polished floor. So it's a really good way of talking about the kind of professional politician who is not prepared to risk something and go out and say, right, the job of politics, as you just said earlier, is choices and persuasion. So so he talked about that, and I've always thought, what's the opposite of that? And I think it's that we're looking for the kind of politician who will carry a tray of drinks across a crowded dance floor and and go, to hell with it, let's have a good time. So I think that's why the smaller
I think that's
parties,
Jim Bolger, isn't it?
Jim Bolger. I'm very fond of Jim, but I wouldn't see him at a dance party carrying a tray of glass.
I'd see him in one of those woolshed parties. But what do you reckon, Bernard? The Ming vase strategy. I'm not sure that Chris Hipkins thinks he's carrying a Ming vase. I feel he's just broken it with that decision on tax.
I think it is a symptom of the low target strategy. I mean, there's low target, Ming vase, same sort of issue here. And what I think was interesting this week, the tragedy of Kiri Allan's demise obviously caught everyone's attention, and again, played into this opposition line about, a coalition of chaos. But the really interesting thing this week, I think, in a purely political sense, was David Parker, as you suggested, Peter. David Parker deciding and
is he Spider-Man?
He could be David.
Or is
Parker.
that Peter Parker?
Peter Parker. Yeah,
sorry.
David he's pretty talented. He probably could climb up a wall. He'd take a long time doing it, but it would be a really well executed climb. And David Parker coming out and saying quite openly, I gave it a good crack. You ignored my perfectly fine policy. Bugger you can have it back, mate. He said he was
actually maybe that's adult.
No, he's being very clear about it. I have a
But
view.
I also think
I put it forward,
he's-
and you said no, so that's fine. You can have it.
What do you think, Josie? Because that seemed, people made Christopher Luxon made a bit of a fuss of it, but that actually seemed to be a really logical way to think of it.
So that's the opposite of the Ming vase politician, right? So and I think the fetish that we have in our politics, left and right, of unity, that you've got to have a caucus that makes the kind of smile that you can only make through sucking air through your teeth. The kind of fake smile that the caucus members come out standing behind the new leader. We're a team player. We're team players. And I think if you look at the culture in the UK, where you can have former Prime Minister like Theresa May stand up and tear Boris Johnson to pieces as a backbench MP, over Brexit and his complete, and over the Partygate, actually, over Partygate in particular, where she just tore him to pieces. And what that did actually was save the Tory party from complete oblivion, because people thought, well, there are people in there who still represent these ideas. And that's great. A contest of ideas, different factions within a party, is how politics should work. And this idea that we've all got to be kind of, that there's a problem if we don't all agree. I mean, there's a bunch of backbenchers in Labor and National, but particularly in Labor, because they had such a great election in 2020, who are about to lose their jobs.
Yeah.
Only their friends and family even know they're there after 3 years. They just sat there asking patsy questions.
Josie,
so what the hell was the point of that?
You haven't been on for a few weeks, but we had a session maybe 2 weeks ago about solutions journalism. And we had a friend of mine on from Australia, which is like misogynist. It's we can't have too many people on from Australia. But the point was that the Kaka or Bernard in this show, we're trying to talk about solutions. How much has the media contributed to that situation that you described of the necessity of loyalty and the sort of feeling that there's division in the party, it's gonna be split, as opposed to these are really interesting issues and there's a debate.
I think it starts from a political culture, but then where does the political culture come from? So it's really difficult to know. But I think it's that if you look at the makeup of Parliament, you look at the makeup of people who work in the media, it is, but it didn't used to be so monocultural in terms of class, right? So we're much better at diversity around ethnicity, around gender. We're not very good at it about diversity of life experience, if you like. So I don't think, Parliament in the 70s used to have, I think it was about 70% came directly from a professional managerial job into Parliament. Now it's 100% come from a professional managerial job straight into Parliament. So even if they've got a working class background, they're coming straight from a middle class job. And it's the same in media, I think, where you've got we've got a very kind of...
Sorry, media is a working class job now, by the way, but carry
it's
on.
not. I mean, that's exactly completely wrong. It isn't.
Working
I mean,
class pay, yep.
it's working class pay, so it means that people...
Means that only
I think
sorry.
I probably earn about
Jesus.
$500 a week at the moment, right? And I'm doing heaps of things. I can only afford to do it for a while like this because, my husband's working and he's got a full-time job. So I think what we've got is a media where it's not to do with pay so much as, who can actually afford to even have a job in the media now? And so, you've got people coming through from, you're recruiting people out of journalism school and so on. And it's very cultural in terms of life experience and class.
It's so interesting that, isn't it? Can we do an entire show on that, please?
Yeah, I mean the focus on the horse race, the focus on the scandal, the gotcha, that is because when you can't have debates about real issues, because the debates about real issues, as a journalist, what you're going to do is focus on the conflict and the heat, the heat spots. And in a world where you can't talk about issues, all you can talk about is who's going to win and who's making mistakes. And so that's all you focus on. And
Bernard, is this the appropriate time then to talk about Kiri Allan? Because I know that's slightly provocative, but while we've got Josie there, I mean, she's just so intelligent and thoughtful about this. Is this the right time? I mean, it's not like we've got an audience of 100 people watching us.
Yes, it's the right time. Is that
I mean, what did you think of what happened this week with Kiri Allan?
Yeah, I mean, I said this in my column, and I'm looking at it sort of from a party perspective for Labour. I mean, it's just, I've never seen anything like it. The week where they're rolling out these sort of rolling announcements on law and order for the whole week. It's their law and order week. Ends with a tragic shooting of a guy who clearly shouldn't have been on Home D, and then shockingly, the Minister of Justice gets arrested. And I can't think of how you could make that worse for the Labour Party. I mean, with Kiri, obviously, you look, as you said, Bernard, you look at her and you go, this is awful and tragic for her, and you just want her to get better and just get out of politics for a while. I mean, that's the healthy thing to do. But it looks so bad for Labour. What it does is it looks like there's such a shallow pool of talent there. I mean, they've actually brought out Barbara Edmonds, who's one of the more talented people who should have been promoted a long time ago, in my view. But it's hard to see what they've got. What they're fishing in this pool of talent that's extremely shallow, and their entire front bench has just sort of spectacularly exploded in different ways. I'm not sure how they change that perception now.
Do you think this was the week that Labour lost the election?
I think it probably was, Bernard. Don't you think? It feels really hard to come back from. I do think there are ways back. Miracles have happened, but you have to, one of the things that Tony Blair got so right was an analysis of how you win. And the first thing he says is when you lose or when you're losing, have an honest discussion with yourselves about why you're losing. And it's usually not because your values are unpopular, but your policies are, or there's a perception that you're incompetent or whatever. It's usually a policy problem. So that's why in the column today, I was trying to say, come up with something that's going to excite us, that's going to go, wow, that would be a game changer. You know, free dental care in New Zealand would be that would be Michael Joseph Savage, level change.
And they've got 82 days to go. So we'll see how it goes. Josie, it's wonderful to have you on. So good. Thank you so much. Of course, we'll have you on again before the election. And we've had a great show today. Thank you very much, Josie Picani.
Thanks,
And Peter, you've got you've got a skateboarding dog, Peter?
Well, I don't have a real skateboarding dog, and I think we have discussed this before, but we were supposed to talk about Israel and the extraordinary what's going on at the moment with the potential destruction of the Israeli democracy that we've all known since 1947. And I was really struck to remember that thing, which I think I've brought up before, I'm afraid, of Obama and Sarkozy being caught on an open mic talking about Netanyahu being, you have to deal with him. I have to deal with him every week. He's a terrible liar. And so one of the things that I said that you claimed to like, Bernard, this week was describing Netanyahu as a Lazarus, a zombie, and a Frankenstein.
Yes.
With justification, I hope, for each one. Now, I thought this was really interesting today, and I appreciate it, and I know I've interrupted you from time to time, but I thought there was a really interesting dialogue. Very great to have Josie back. And I don't know, is this the week that they lost it? Because I was thinking also, Bernard, about Franco Flynn, who you might have been, I imagine you were at Massey when this happened. And my recollection, which I think he's dead now, so it's probably not defamatory, is that he was pissed and fell over outside Parliament on the street across the road, Bowen, whatever it's called, and claimed that he'd been mugged. And then it became a joke that he'd been mugged by Jack Daniels, Johnny Walker, and another one. It's a very interesting problem. I think that was incredibly sad what happened this week, and was just an awful sort of personal crisis vented all over. I'm not sure it betrays bad judgment of Chris Hipkins, does it?
No, I think it's a tragedy, and you could see in the way that Chris Hipkins dealt with the media on Monday, shocked.
Yes,
and to be fair to him, he fronted up. He spoke clearly and authentically about how he felt about it. And I think the opposition's deciding to jump on it and say this shows that Chris Hipkins has bad judgment. I just think that fell flat.
It was a little opportunistic.
Yeah, and all they had to do was just step back, and it would have it shocked people that and because it's the seventh minister, the fourth minister in 7 months.
But all for different reasons. I mean, in her case, it really is surely there, but for the grace of God go we.
Yes. And on that note, I think it's time to end the kaka and look forward to seeing you all again next week.
See you next week, Bernard.
Peter, thank you very much.
No, thank you, everybody.
Cheers. And that has been the Hoon for Friday the 28th of July. Ka kite anō, everyone. Bye-bye.